Hey guys, tonight we are drifting back, not to the age of glittering knights and soaring cathedrals, but to something far more fundamental, far more humble. We are going to the very foundation of medieval life itself, to the dirt beneath your feet, and the daily grind that defined existence for nearly everyone. Tonight, we are exploring the unassuming history of medieval bread. Picture yourself not in a grand castle hall, but standing at the edge of a vast, open field under a wide, gray sky. The air is cool and damp, smelling of freshly turned earth and distant wood smoke. You can feel the coarse texture of your rough wool tunic against your skin, and the slight, constant ache in your lower back from a lifetime of labor. This is your world, and it revolves around one thing, one single, precious commodity, grain. You are about to learn that the story of bread is the story of survival, and you probably won't survive this era without understanding its absolute, non-negotiable dominance. Your entire year, your health, your wealth, and your place in society are dictated by the success or failure of the harvest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, feel free to drop a comment below letting everyone know where you're listening from and what the local time is. It's always fascinating to see this community stretching across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a deep breath, the chill morning air filling your lungs as you stand at the wooden fence of your small, cramped plot. Before you stretches the vast, open field of the Lord's domain, a great sea of dark, rich soil divided into three enormous strips. This is the three-field system, the brilliant, slow revolutionizing agricultural engine of the medieval world, and it dictates the rhythm of your life with the inevitability of the seasons. One strip lies fallow, resting, dotted with weeds and grazing sheep whose manure is diligently returning precious nutrients to the exhausted earth. Another is a vibrant green carpet of barley or oats, waving gently in the breeze, destined not for your bread, but for the Lord's livestock or the village's ale. But it's the third strip that holds your gaze, that makes your stomach clench with a mixture of hope and dread. Here, the stubborn, vital stalks of rye rise from the ground, interspersed with the slightly more delicate, but equally precious wheat. This is the bread corn. This is life itself. Your eyes aren't seeing potential flour yet. You're seeing the backbreaking months of labor to come, the sowing, the weeding, the constant fear of too much rain or not enough, of a late frost that could wipe out everything. The success of this crop isn't an abstract economic concept. It is the difference between a full belly through the long, dark winter and the gnawing, desperate pain of famine. Historians still argue whether this system was a efficient response to soil exhaustion or a primitive trap that kept yields perilously low, forever teetering on the brink of disaster. Your world, from this vantage point, looks profoundly different from ours. The endless, fenceless monoculture farms of today are 1,000 years in the future. The medieval landscape is a patchwork and mosaic of these vast open fields interspersed with meadows for hay, dense woods for timber and foraging, and the common waste ground where your family might graze a single scrawny goose if you're lucky. The forest looms dark and mysterious at the edge of the cleared land, a place of wolves, outlaws, and ancient folklore. But even that forest is defined by the grain. Its trees are cleared for more fields. Its acorns and beech mast are gathered in desperate years to make a bitter, awful paste that can barely be called bread. The entire geography of your life is organized around the production of these two grasses, wheat and rye. The villages cluster together for protection and to be close to the fields. The roads, such as they are muddy tracks connecting these grain-producing hubs to the manor house, the mill, and eventually, to the towns. The Lord's castle or manor house isn't just a military fortification or a home. It is the central warehouse and administrative heart of this agricultural enterprise. Its towering stone walls aren't just for deflecting arrows. They are for safeguarding the most valuable treasure of all, the stored grain in the undercrofts, safe from rats, damp, and most importantly, from you and your hungry neighbors. And you are hungry. Your diet is monotonous, a relentless beige parade. You might have a small vegetable patch with some onions and cabbages. You might have a few eggs from the chickens that peck around your hut's dirt floor, and if you're very fortunate you might taste a sliver of bacon on a high holy day. But for now, in the chill of the morning, your breakfast is a thick, gray porridge made from coarse barley or oat grains, and your lunch and dinner will be bread. Always bread. It is your plate, your utensil, your primary source of calories. You will consume between 2 and 3 pounds of it today, every day. It is not a choice, it is a biological imperative. The sheer caloric need for the manual labor you perform plowing, reaping, threshing, hauling requires this massive intake of carbohydrates. Your body is a furnace, and grain is its only fuel. This is the central, undeniable truth of the medieval world. The glittering tournaments, the pious monasteries, the burgeoning trade routes, all of it is built upon the slumped shoulders of millions of peasants like you, staring out at a field of rye, praying to an often silent God for just enough sun and just enough rain to get through one more year. The quirky, fringe detail that brings this home: in many places, the first beer of the day, a weak, low-alcohol small beer, was often consumed for breakfast, even by children. It was safer than water, provided some calories, and took the edge off the relentless grind. It was liquid bread, another thread in the vast, essential tapestry of grain. The journey from stalk to sustenance is a long and arduous one, and your next stop is a place of immense power, grinding noise, and inevitable taxation. You've spent weeks under the sun, your body a symphony of aches, swinging a sickle to reap what was sown, gathering the precious stalks into bundles to be threshed and winnowed. Now, clutched in a rough sack slung over your shoulder, you carry a portion of your family's hard-won grain. It's not a large portion. The lion's share is already stored in the Lord's granary, his rightful due. This sack represents your family's survival for the week, and you are taking it to the only place for miles that can transform these hard, inedible kernels into something that can fill a belly: the mill. The path is well worn, a deep groove in the earth made by countless feet on the same errand, and it leads you to the bank of the river, to a building that is both a marvel of engineering and a symbol of your subjugation. The watermill stands sturdy, its great wooden wheel turned by the relentless flow of the current, a constant, groaning, splashing presence that dominates the soundscape of this part of the village. This isn't some independent businessman's operation. This is the manorial mill, and the lord, or more often the local monastery, holds a monopoly on its use. You have no choice. You are legally bound, by the custom of the manor, to have your grain ground here and nowhere else. To attempt to grind it yourself with a hand quern is not just frugality, it is a crime, a defiance of the Lord's authority, punishable by a heavy fine. The mill is a dragon, and you are bringing it, your tribute. You step inside, the air thick with the fine, floating dust that catches in the light, streaming through cracks in the wooden walls. It's a magical, ethereal haze, but it's also a practical nightmare, coating your skin, your clothes, the inside of your nostrils with the essence of powdered grain. The sound is overwhelming, the deep, rhythmic thunder of the grinding stones, the constant rush of water from outside, the creak and groan of massive timber gears. This is the heartbeat of the manor, a mechanical pulse that echoes the biological one in your chest. In the dim light, you see the miller, a figure of immense local importance, and, in your eyes and in the eyes of every peasant, profound suspicion. He is covered head to toe in a fine white powder, a ghost of flour, and his beard, if he is one, is likely a stiff, pasty mess. He moves with an air of busy authority, overseeing the flow of grain from your sack into the hopper that feeds the great stones. These stones, the heart of the operation, are a masterpiece of medieval technology. The bottom stone, the bed stone, is fixed. The top stone, the runner stone, is turned by the power of the water wheel below. The grain is fed between them and is literally crushed and shredded into powder. The miller's skill lies in setting the gate of the stones, the precise gap between them, too close, and the flour is scorched by the friction, too far, and the grain is merely cracked and bruised, yielding a terrible, coarse meal. Historians still argue whether the efficiency of these early watermills was a net benefit, that improved calorie availability, or simply a more effective tool for the lords to extract wealth from the peasantry. And the extraction is what happens next. The miller doesn't work for free. His payment is the multure, a tax taken in kind. For every sack of grain you bring him, he is entitled to take a portion of the flour that comes out. It's a simple, brutal system. You watch, your heart sinking a little, as he scoops a measured portion of your family as future out of the stream of fresh flour falling from the stones and into his own separate tub. Is it a fair measure? You can never be sure. The miller is notorious for having heavy thumbs on the scales, for using cleverly designed sacks with false bottoms, for any number of tricks to skim a little extra for himself, or for the lord he serves. He is the villain of 1,000 peasant jokes and curses, a necessary evil you are forced to tolerate. There's a pervasive belief, a quirky and fringe tidbit of medieval life, that a good miller could even manipulate the process to steal more, perhaps, by having a hidden trough or a confederate below the millstones to catch the lost flour. This deep-seated distrust is immortalized in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, where the miller is a brutish, dishonest, and physically imposing figure, a reflection of a near-universal stereotype. You take your now slightly lighter sack of flour, the tangible result of a year's labor now, reduced by feudal dues, and you head back to your dark, smoky hut. The mill groaning fades behind you, but the memory of the lost flour does not. It's a weekly reminder of your place in this world. You work the land, but you never truly own its fruits. The mainstream historical fact here is the sheer economic power of the milling monopoly, a cornerstone of the manorial system that persisted for centuries, ensuring the lord's control over the most vital step in the food production process. The scent of your own flour, now safely, if diminished, in your possession, is a small comfort as you trudge back towards the cluster of wattleland daub huts you call home. But the journey isn't over. The flour in your sack is potential, not sustenance. It must be transformed, and that requires one more submission to the manorial system, one more point of control. You approach the large, stone-built bakehouse, a separate structure near the manor house itself, and the air changes. The damp, earthy smells of the village are burned away, replaced by the profound, mouth-watering, soul-comforting aroma of baking bread. It's a smell that speaks of warmth and safety, a stark contrast to the reality of the transaction you are about to undertake. This is the manorial oven, another monopolistic right of your lord. Just as you couldn't grind your own grain, you are, in most places and at most times, forbidden from baking your own bread, in your own home. The risk of a stray spark from a domestic hearth igniting a thatched roof and burning the entire village to the ground is too great. So, the lord provides the communal oven, for a fee, of course. The furnigium, the oven tax, is another small slice of your autonomy and your produce, paid in either coin or yet more loaves. You join a small queue of other villagers, all clutching their precious sacks, all waiting their turn to use the immense, brick-lined cavity that is currently radiating a terrifying, beautiful heat. The baker, or more accurately, the lord's ovenmaster, is a less suspicious figure than the miller, but no less powerful. He wields the long, wooden peel, a flat paddle like a giant oar. With the practiced ease of a knight wielding a sword, he slides it into the fiery depths, retrieving loaves that are perfectly bronzed and steaming, loading in the pale, soft, unbaked dough brought by the peasants. You watch the hypnotic rhythm of it, the dance of heat and dough. The oven itself is a beast that must be fed first with a great fire of kindling and wood until the interior bricks are glowing white hot. Then the ashes are raked out, the floor is hastily mopped clean, and the temperature is just right for the bread to be baked by the retained, radiating heat. It's a precarious art. Too hot, and the loaves scorch on the outside while remaining doughy within. Too cool, and they emerge as pale, sad, dense bricks. You hand over your portion of flour to the oven master's assistant, who will mix it with water and a piece of saved dough from the previous batch, the sourdough starter that has been alive longer than you have, a literal living legacy of yeasts and bacteria that will leaven your bread. There's no precise recipe, no measuring cups. It's all by feel, by eye, by tradition. Historians still argue whether this communal baking was primarily a safety measure or yet another clever feudal mechanism for control and extraction, a way to ensure even the very act of feeding your family enriched your lord. But what of your own hearth? Your home is a single, smoky room, dominated by a central fire pit. The smoke lazily finds its way out through a hole in the roof, blackening the rafters and everything else inside. Here, you do bake, but not the fine, lofty loaves of the manorial oven. Your options are limited and humble. You might make a simple unleavened flatbread, a quick mixture of flour and water slapped directly onto the hot stones surrounding the fire, cooked in minutes and eaten immediately. Or, if you are fortunate enough to own one, you might have a bachinas, a small, portable clay or iron pan, which you can place in the embers to bake a slightly thicker, more cake-like bread. But the true staple of the peasant hearth is not baked bread at all, but pottage. This is a thick, stew-like concoction that simmers in a cauldron over the fire for days, even weeks, constantly replenished with new ingredients. Into this go your grains, oats, barley, sometimes even your precious rye, along with any vegetables, herbs, and if you're incredibly lucky, a bit of bacon or stock. The grain swells and thickens the mixture into a hearty, if monotonous, gruel. It is, in essence, liquid bread, a way to consume your grain without needing the lord's oven. The quirky, fringe element of this is the knife bread. In the deepest depths of winter, when even pottage is thin, a family might simply mix flour with water into a paste, shape it around the tip of a knife, and toast it directly in the fire, a desperate, minimal form of sustenance. The mainstream fact is the sheer ubiquity of the manorial oven's monopoly, a near-universal feature of village life that meant the most comforting smell in the world, was also a permanent reminder of your obligations. The product of all this labor and taxation, the final, tangible result, is not a single, uniform thing. Bread, in your world, is a language. Its color, its texture, its size, and its ingredients speak volumes about who you are, where you stand, and what you can expect from life. It is the most honest social marker there is, the edible caste system. As you wait your turn at the manorial oven, you see this hierarchy laid bare in the dough itself. The Lord's bread, when it is baked, is a thing of wonder, carried carefully on the peel by the oven master himself. This is pain de main or simnel bread, made from the finest, most thoroughly bolted white wheat flour. It is sifted again and again through ever finer cloths to remove every last speck of bran, resulting in a loaf that is almost ethereally white, soft, and light. To you, this whiteness is not just a color. It is a symbol of purity, wealth, and a divine right to a life free from coarse things. It is often baked into fancy twisted shapes or even enriched with expensive ingredients like eggs, butter, and milk, precious commodities that would never, ever find their way into your own dough. The very sight of it is a minor insult, a reminder of the chasm between your existence and his. Your own bread, the one you will collect shortly, is a different creature entirely. This is the household bread, the dark, dense, chewy staple of the common folk. It is usually a mixture of rye and wheat, a grain known as maslin or meslin. Rye is a hardy crop, resistant to poor soil and bad weather, but it produces a dark, sticky, and strongly flavored flour. The wheat is there to lighten it slightly, to make it marginally more palatable and easier to digest. The loaf is dark brown, almost black, and the crust is thick and tough, designed to protect the saffron within and to give your teeth something to work against. It is heavy, a solid weight in your hand, and it will stay edible for days, if not a week. This is your trencher, your plate, your sustenance. But even this is not the bottom of the bread basket. Below you, there are those who cannot even afford maslin. Their bread is horse bread or bean bread, made from barley, oats, peas, beans, lentils, or even acorns and chestnuts ground into a bitter meal. It is a desperate, gritty, often stomach-upsetting substance, barely recognizable as bread. It's the food of the truly destitute, of failed harvests, and of last resorts. Historians still argue whether this strict hierarchy of grains was a rigid social law, or a more fluid economic reality, with people eating whatever they could afford in a given season. The lines between wheat, maslin, and barley bread blurring in times of hardship. And then there are the breads for purpose, the ones that defy the simple rich-poor divide. The army on the march requires biscuit or twice-cooked bread loaves that are baked until all moisture is removed, making them rock-hard and nearly imperishable. They are more like edible weapons, needing to be soaked in soup or water to be consumed. The sailor's bread is hardtack, a similar invention of brutal practicality, designed to survive months at sea in damp, rat-infested holds. For the sick, there is panis medicatus, bread infused with medicinal herbs, ground pearls, or even gold leaf, based on the ancient theory of correspondences, where the value and purity of the ingredient would transfer to the patient. The quirky, fringe element in all this is the bread of illusion and satire. There are accounts, particularly from festivals like Carnival, of bakers creating joke breads, loaves shaped like animals or genitalia, or breads so heavily spiced they were literally fiery hot to eat, causing comical distress to the unsuspecting. This reminds you that even in this world defined by scarcity and hierarchy, the human spirit finds a way to play, to mock, and to subvert. Even with something as sacred as daily bread, the mainstream fact is the absolute correlation between social status and bread quality. Your place at the table, and the bread upon it, was the most immediate and visceral demonstration of your place in the medieval universe. You didn't need a family crest or a written pedigree. You just needed to show your loaf. As you finally collect your warm, dark maslin loaf from the oven master, you handle it with a mixture of relief and deep-seated suspicion. You give it a surreptitious squeeze, feeling for the promised density, and you bring it close to your nose, taking a subtle sniff. This is not paranoia. It is a necessary survival skill. You are checking for fraud. The baker, whether the Lord's man at the communal oven or a guildsman in a town, holds immense power over your health and your wallet, and the temptation to abuse that power is a legendary, constant struggle. The most common trick is simple short waiting, selling a loaf that is lighter than the advertised size. But the deception goes far deeper, into the very composition of the bread itself. A dishonest baker might mix his flour with cheaper substances to bulk it out, to make a little grain go a much longer and much more profitable way. You've heard the horror stories, the tavern tales that make you shudder. Chalk dust, crushed bone, white clay, sawdust, even sand and ashes have been found kneaded into the dough. These adulterants add weight and volume, but they do nothing for nutrition and everything for misery. Eating such bread leads to rotten teeth, crippling stomach pains, and malnutrition. It is a slow, quiet poison sold as sustenance. This isn't just a matter of bad ethics, it's a matter of state security. The price and quality of bread are so fundamental to the stability of the realm that kings and local magistrates have stepped in with some of the earliest and most detailed consumer protection laws in history. This is the Assize of Bread and Ale, a complex set of regulations that spreads across England and has equivalents throughout Europe. The Assize is a masterpiece of medieval bureaucracy. It doesn't set a fixed price for a loaf of bread. Instead, it creates a sliding scale. The law dictates that for a given price of grain, a baker must produce a loaf of a specific weight. If the price of grain goes up, the loaf must become smaller to keep the price stable. If grain becomes cheaper, the loaf must become larger. Magistrates, known as aleconers, are tasked with enforcing this. They carry official sets of weights and regularly perform spot checks on the bakeries and market stalls. They are the medieval food standards agency, and their word is law. The mainstream historical fact here is the sheer sophistication of this system. It was an attempt to create economic fairness in a volatile market, to protect the poor from starvation, and to prevent the civil unrest that inevitably followed when people could not afford their daily bread. The punishments for breaking the Assize are brutal and public, designed to shame and deter. A baker caught selling underweight or adulterated bread might be dragged through the streets on a hurdle with the offending loaf tied around his neck. But the most common and iconic punishment is the pillory. The guilty baker is locked by his head and hands into the wooden framework, often erected in the market square right next to his own shop. The fraudulent loaves are then crumbled and scattered around him, or sometimes even burned beneath his nose, and then the public takes over. This is where your simmering resentment finds its outlet. You and your fellow villagers are encouraged, practically invited, to pelt the offender with whatever comes to hand: rotten vegetables, mud, animal dung, stones. It is a carnival of contempt, a ritual humiliation that reinforces the social contract. The baker's betrayal is not just a commercial fraud. It is a sin against the community, a direct attack on the health of your children. Historians still argue whether these draconian measures were actually effective, or if bakers, operating in a system of razor-thin margins, were forced into deception simply to survive, making them scapegoats for deeper economic problems. The quirky, fringe detail in this saga of deception is the supposed baker's mark. In some towns, to ensure accountability, each baker was required to make a unique identification mark. On the bottom of his loaves, a simple cross, a series of dots, a unique pattern. That way, if a loaf was found to be fraudulent, the culprit could be easily identified. This gave rise to a fascinating bit of folklore, that the familiar crisscross pattern, sometimes slashed onto the top of a loaf of bread today, isn't just for decoration, or to help it rise evenly. Some say it's a lingering cultural memory of this practice, a way for the baker to sign his work, a ghost of medieval consumer protection etched in dough. Whether that's true or just a charming story is lost to time, but it speaks to the deep and ancient connection between the baker, his product, and the community's vigilant eye. So as you break your loaf later, you'll examine the crumb not just for taste, but for telltale grit. You'll chew carefully, your senses alert for the chalky aftertaste of betrayal. Your bread is your life, and anyone who tampers with it is playing with fire, a fire far hotter than any oven. The gritty, suspicious texture of your bread is soon washed away, not with water, but with its sibling and rival for the grain's affection, ale. You see, the same fields that produce the rye and wheat for your loaf also produce the barley for your drink. The two are locked in a constant, silent competition for the harvest, a tug-of-war between solid and liquid sustenance. But if you had to choose, in many ways, the ale is more important. This might seem strange to your modern sensibilities, but water is a treacherous companion in your world. It flows downstream from other villages, past latrines, tanneries, and grazing animals. To drink it straight is to invite dysentery, cholera, and a host of other swift and brutal illnesses. Ale, however, is safe. The process of brewing, boiling the water with the malted barley, then fermenting it kills the pathogens. It is liquid nourishment, a vital source of calories, and the only truly safe hydration available to you. So, while you consume 2 to 3 pounds of bread a day, you might also drink a gallon of ale. It is not for getting drunk, it is for surviving. The weakest type, small beer or table beer, is mildly alcoholic, slightly sweet, and cloudy, and it is consumed by everyone from the youngest child to the oldest elder from morning until night. The creation of this essential fluid is not the work of a grand, male-dominated guild like the bakers. It is, primarily, the domain of women. In your village, it is the alewife who is the crucial artisan. She works from her home, a large cauldron perpetually simmering over her hearth. The process is alchemy to you. She starts by malting the barley, soaking it in water until it germinates, then drying it in a kiln to stop the process. This malted barley is then crushed and mixed with hot water in the mash tun, a large tub, where the enzymes convert the starches into fermentable sugars. The resulting sweet liquid, the wort, is drained off and boiled, often with a handful of herbs for bitterness, a primitive form of hopping, though the widespread use of hops is a later innovation. After cooling, the wort is transferred to a fermentation vessel, and the magic begins. Wild yeasts, carried on the air or introduced from a previous batch, descend upon the sugary liquid and begin their work, bubbling and transforming it into ale. The alewife then sells it directly from her door, signaling its availability by hanging out a tall pole topped with a bushel of greenery and ale steak. This is her small business, a rare avenue for economic independence, and it makes her both a respected and sometimes resented figure in the community. Historians still argue whether the eventual takeover of brewing by male-dominated guilds was driven by economic factors, the rising capital required for larger operations, or simply a systematic suppression of a traditionally female trade. The connection between bread and ale is more than just shared ingredients. It's a symbiotic loop of survival. The grains are the obvious link, but the byproducts of one become the inputs of the other. The bran and other husks sifted out from the finest white flour, the seconds and thirdings that are too coarse for the Lord's table, are perfect for thickening the peasant's pottage, or crucially for feeding the livestock that pull the plows and provide manure for the fields. Even the stale, rock-hard ends of your loaves, the trenchers soaked with gravy and juices from your meal, aren't wasted. They are collected, dried, and could be crumbled into the mash tun to add body and a few extra fermentable sugars to a batch of small beer. Nothing is wasted. The entire system is a closed loop of efficiency born from sheer necessity. The quirky, fringe tidbit in this world of brewing is the deep-seated superstition that surrounded it. The process of fermentation was mysterious and unpredictable. A batch could fail for no discernible reason. This led to a belief in supernatural interference. Alewives were often suspected of witchcraft, their success attributed to pacts with dark forces rather than skill. There were elaborate rituals to ensure a good brew, stirring only sunwise, chanting specific rhymes, or even christening the batch with a drop of blood. It was a science not yet understood, so it was magic. So, as you sit on a rough bench outside your hut at the end of the day, the dim sun setting behind the fields, you take a long drink from your wooden tankard. The small beer is thin, slightly sour, and refreshing. In one hand, you hold the crust of your dark maslin bread. In the other, the tankard. They are two sides of the same coin, the solid and the liquid expression of the harvest. One fills your stomach, the other quenches your thirst and keeps you safe from the invisible dangers in the water. The mainstream historical fact is the sheer volume of ale consumed. It was not a recreational luxury. It was a dietary staple, a fundamental pillar of medieval nutrition and public health. The grain that could have been baked into an extra loaf was instead brewed into a gallon of life-preserving liquid. This constant calculation, bread for solidity, ale for safety, was a daily reality. The field of barley you passed earlier isn't just a crop. It's the village's water supply, its pharmacy, and its primary beverage, all growing silently under the sun, waiting for the alewife's skilled hands to work her essential misunderstood magic. The weight of the dense maslin bread in your hand and the faint, earthy taste of the small beer on your tongue are, in this moment, the most mundane of sensations. But on the Sabbath, in the cold, echoing space of the village church, these same substances are utterly transformed. They are no longer mere physical sustenance. They become the most profound mystery of your faith. The grain and the grape, or in your case, the grain and the barley, cease to be products of the soil and become conduits of divine grace. This is the doctrine of transubstantiation, a complex theological idea that filters down to you not through learned debate, but through ritual, smell, and taste. You watch as the priest, his back to you, elevates the host of thin, white, unleavened wafer of the finest wheat bread. The bells ring, you kneel on the hard stone floor, and you believe, with every fiber of your being, that through the words of the liturgy, that wafer has ceased to be bread and has become, in its true substance, the actual body of Jesus Christ. The same happens with the wine and the chalice, becoming his blood. This is the miracle of the Mass, and it happens every week, centering your entire spiritual universe on a piece of bread. This sacrament, the Eucharist, is the heart of medieval Christianity. It is the reason the finest, whitest wheat is reserved for the Church. Only the purest, most refined substance is fit to become the vessel for the divine. The gritty, dark maslin you eat is for your earthly body. The sinless white pain each anner is for your soul. Your entire relationship with bread is thus bifurcated. There is the bread of the field, the bread of the oven, the bread of your table, all subject to toil, taxation, and potential fraud. And then there is the bread of heaven, which is beyond all such earthly corruptions. This spiritual hierarchy mirrors the social one. The Lord eats white bread, you eat brown bread, but God consumes and is the whitest bread of all. The mainstream historical fact here is the absolute centrality of the Eucharist. It wasn't just a symbol, it was the literal, physical presence of God among the community, the essential ritual that defined a Christian society. To be excluded from it, through excommunication, was a social and spiritual death sentence far worse than any physical hunger. But the Church's relationship with bread doesn't end at the altar. The monasteries, those vast, powerful agricultural enterprises you've already encountered as mill owners, are also centers of baking on an industrial scale. They bake not only the sacramental wafers, but also vast quantities of bread for their own large communities, for pilgrims, and for the poor who gather at their gates seeking charity. This panis pauperum, the bread of the poor, is a tangible expression of Christian duty, a way for the wealthy Church to redistribute some of its immense agricultural surplus. It's often bread that is several days old, hard and stale, but it is food, and it is given in the name of Christ. Historians still argue whether this monastic charity was a genuine act of piety, and a crucial social safety net, or a calculated tool for maintaining social control and legitimizing vast inequality. The quirky, fringe element of all this is the Pax bread. Before the communion wafer became standardized, in some regions a large loaf of bread, the Pain Bennet, was brought to the church by a parishioner, blessed by the priest, and then distributed to the congregation. A piece of this holy bread would be passed from person to person, each kissing it as a sign of peace and community before eating it. It was a literal breaking of bread together, a ritual of social bonding as much as spiritual one, a faint echo of the early Christian agape feasts. This holy purpose also sanctifies the work of the baker in a way that tempers the suspicion surrounding him. Yes, he might be a fraudster, but he is also, indirectly, a servant of God. He provides the raw material for the miracle. His craft, when performed honestly, is a form of piety. There are even saints associated with bread and baking. Saint Honorius is the patron saint of bakers. His festival day is a holiday for the guild, and a missed one might mean a donation of bread to the poor. His image might even be carved into the oven itself for luck and protection. So the next time you see the baker, you see a man of two worlds, a potential cheat, who must be watched with a gimlet eye in the marketplace, but also a necessary craftsman, without whom the most sacred ritual of your life could not take place. The bread he produces fuels both the body and the soul, the kingdom of earth and the kingdom of heaven. It's a heavy responsibility, and perhaps it's that weight, as much as any greed, that sometimes causes him to stumble as you leave the church, the taste of the holy wafer a bland, dry, dissolving crispness still on your tongue. You look at your own dark loaf with a new, slightly odd perspective. It is all just bread, and yet, it is so much more. Leaving the spiritual awe of the church, you return to the tangible, grimy reality of your home. The divine mystery of the Eucharist is replaced by the practical, unceremonious truth of the meal. It's time to eat, and for this, your bread will serve a purpose long before it passes your lips. You don't have a plate. The very concept is an absurd luxury. Ceramic and wooden trenchers exist, of course, but they are for the Lord's table, for displaying his wealth. Your table, such as it is, a rough-hewn board laid across to trestles, is bare. So you take your day-old maslined loaf, now firm and sturdy, and you take your knife. With a practiced hand, you carve into it, not slicing it horizontally, but hollowing it out. You carve a large, deep, bowl-shaped depression in the top of the loaf, leaving a thick wall of crust all the way around. You have just created your plate. This is a trencher, a word that will eventually come to mean the plate itself, but for now, it means this edible container you hold in your hand. It is the most fundamental form of recycling, a use for bread that is slightly stale but still perfectly good for soaking up whatever you have to put on it. The meal itself is a simple affair. The main event is a pottage that has been simmering over the hearth fire for days, a thick, gray-brown gruel of pulses, maybe a few onions, and whatever grains you could spare that weren't sent to the mill. If you are exceptionally fortunate, there might be a sliver of salted pork or a bit of stock from a boiled bone enriching it. You ladle this steaming, hearty mixture directly into the hollowed-out well of your bread trencher. The hot liquid immediately begins to seep into the dense crumb, softening it, infusing it with flavor, and warming it through. You eat the pottage with a wooden spoon, but you are also eating the bowl. With every scoop, you tear off a piece of the softened, gravy-soaked bread from the edge and consume it. The meal is a slow deconstruction of your own tableware. The flavors are deep, earthy, and satisfying, the nutty, slightly sour taste of the rye maslin merging perfectly with the savory, porridge-like pottage. This is not a meal of separate components. It is a single, unified culinary experience where the container and the contained become one. This is the mainstream, everyday reality for most people. But the fate of the trencher after the meal is where things get interesting and a little contentious. In a poorer household, like yours, nothing is wasted. You, your family, you eat the entire trencher, every last soaked crumb. It's the best part of the meal, the flavor-packed reward for your labor. But in a great hall, the story is different. After a grand feast, the Lord and his family would have eaten from trenchers of fine manchet bread, the finest white wheat. Their trenchers would have been soaked with rich sauces, drippings from roasted meats, and the juices of fruits and spices. These used, sauce-laden trenchers were not eaten by the nobility. That was considered beneath them. Instead, they were collected after the meal and given to the almoner, who would then distribute them to the poor who gathered at the gates of the manor or the monastery. This was presented as a charitable act, a way for the wealthy to fulfill their Christian duty to care for the less fortunate. They were called the alms of the Lord. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine form of charity and efficient recycling, or merely a symbolic, slightly degrading way of offloading leftovers, a performance of piety that cost the Lord nothing but his table scraps. The quirky, fringe tidbit in this system is the potential for a much darker form of recycling. In times of extreme scarcity, even the most unthinkable things might be used. There are vague, troubling references in some texts and municipal records to a substance called recycled bread or second-hand bread. This wasn't just stale loaves. In the most desperate of times, it is whispered that enterprising or utterly depraved individuals might collect the used trenchers from taverns or even the streets, where they had been discarded after use, and bring them home. These sodden, often filthy, bread plates trodden underfoot and mixed with dirt, and worse, would be dried out in the sun or by the fire, ground down into a gritty meal, and mixed with water to form a new horrifying dough to be baked again. This ultimate act of desperation, this bread made from the leavings of other bread, is the absolute bottom of the barrel, a testament to how far hunger could drive a person. It's a practice so grim it often exists only in the margins of condemnation, in laws forbidding it or in sermons using it as an example of deepest poverty. So as you finish your meal consuming the last of your own edible plate, you are participating in a ritual that stretches from your humble hearth to the Lord's high table, a cycle of consumption and charity that is both practical and deeply symbolic. Your bread has been your field, your tax, your faith, and now, finally, it is your table. And soon, it will be gone, and you will begin the cycle all over again tomorrow. The world of the village baker, for all its suspicions and monopolies, is at least a known quantity. But now, let's follow the grain on a different path, not to the manorial oven, but into the heart of a growing medieval town. The air here is different, thicker, louder, and infinitely more dangerous. The close-packed timber-framed houses lean over narrow, shadowed streets, and the smell is a complex cocktail of humanity, animals, waste, and industry. And cutting through it all, a scent that is both comforting and terrifying, the smell of burning. Here, the baker is not just a servant of the Lord, he is a master craftsman, a member of a powerful guild, and a constant, walking fire hazard. You navigate these cramped streets with a sense of trepidation, because everyone knows the baker's shop is a necessary evil, a dragon's den nestled amidst the tinder-dry city. His oven is a massive, domed brick structure, often built right into the ground floor of his own home. Its heat leaching into the living quarters above. It burns day and night, a contained inferno that threatens, at any moment, to break free and consume the entire street. This is why the Bakers' Guilds, one of the earliest and most powerful trade associations, wield such immense control and impose such strict regulations. Their rules are not just about quality and weight, they are about collective survival. The guild dictates everything. The hours a baker can fire his oven often forbidden at night. A rule frequently broken to meet demand. The materials he can use for fuel. Certain woods that spark too easily might be banned, and the mandatory safety measures. He might be required to have a large barrel of water always on hand, a leather bucket ready to be filled, or a ladder long enough to reach his roof. His apprentices are tasked not just with kneading dough but with constantly watching the oven, ensuring no stray embers escape. The fear is not abstract. Medieval towns burned with horrifying regularity. A spark from a forge, a tipped-over candle, a cooking fire left unattended, and a city made almost entirely of wood and thatch can be reduced to ashes in hours. The baker, with his perpetual, roaring fire, is public enemy number one in the urban fight against conflagration. The mainstream historical fact is the sheer power and reach of these guilds. They controlled training through the apprentice journeyman master system, set prices, provided a social safety net for members' families, and fiercely protected their trade secrets and monopolies from outside competition. The life of a guild baker is one of brutal hours and immense pressure. His day begins long before dawn, stoking the oven's fire to the perfect temperature for the first batch of bread. The dough, mixed and left to rise overnight, is punched down, shaped, and loaded into the blistering heat with the long wooden peel. The shop opens at first light, a queue already forming. His customers are no longer fellow villagers bound by manorial custom, but a cross-section of urban life, other craftsmen, servants buying for their wealthy employers, clerics, and the poor looking for yesterday's stale loaves at a discount. He must cater to all of them, from the coarse brown bread for the laborers to the fine white manchette for the city's elite. His success depends on his speed, his consistency, and his reputation for honesty, a reputation the guild works hard to police, as one bad baker can tarnish the name of them all. Historians still argue whether these guilds were ultimately beneficial, protecting quality and ensuring a living wage for craftsmen, or whether they were restrictive cartels that stifled innovation and kept prices artificially high for consumers. Amidst this world of fire and regulation exists a wonderfully quirky and fringe belief, a superstition that clings to the bakery like flour dust. It involves cats. Every bakery worth its salt, it is said, has a bakery cat. Officially, its job is to keep the mice and rats out of the grain store, but unofficially, its role is far more mystical. A black cat sleeping peacefully near the oven is a sign of good luck, a charm that ensures the bread will rise perfectly and the fire will stay contained. A cat that is restless, or that washes its face persistently, was seen as a portent of a failed batch or, worse, an impending fire. Some bakers even believed that the spirit of the oven, a mischievous or malevolent entity, could be appeased by keeping a cat happy. There are tales of bakers who would pour a saucer of milk for the cat before firing the oven, a small offering to the unseen forces that govern their volatile craft. It's a charming, human response to the terrifying unpredictability of their professional attempt to impose a sense of control through ritual in a world where a single spark could mean utter ruin. So the next time you buy a loaf in the town market, you might glance into the dim interior of the bakery and see a pair of glowing eyes, watching you from a corner, a silent furry guardian of the flame. It's a small comfort, perhaps, but in a world of such palpable danger, every bit of magic helps. The comforting rhythm of the mill, the heat of the oven, the weight of the daily loaf, all of it hinges on a fragile, terrifying premise that the harvest will come. But now, let's walk back to that field you stood in at the beginning, the one that held so much promise. The sky is no longer a benign gray, it is a oppressive, leaden sheet that has remained unmoved for weeks. Or worse, it is a cruel, empty blue, the sun beating down with a malice that cracks the earth and withers the young, green stalks before your eyes. This is the nightmare that lurks at the edge of every peasant's consciousness. Crop failure. The system you live in has no redundancy, no safety net beyond a thin layer of stored grain. A single bad season is hardship. 2 is disaster. 3 is the end of the world. You stand there, the dry wind pulling at your tunic, and you see not food, but death growing in the fields. The rye, that hardy, reliable staple, is stunted and brown. But sometimes, the danger is more insidious. Sometimes, it grows a strange, dark purple spur instead of a healthy head of grain. This is ergot, a parasitic fungus, and it is a hidden poison that turns bread into a weapon. The mainstream historical reality of famine is almost too brutal to comprehend. When the harvests failed, the price of grain didn't just rise, it skyrocketed to levels that placed it utterly beyond your reach. The Lord's granaries might still be full, but he is not selling. He is hoarding, waiting for the prices to climb even higher, or saving it for his own household and retainers. The law of the market overrides the law of humanity. You sell your few meager possessions, a tool, the family's extra blanket, even your hut itself for a handful of grain. Then you eat the seed corn, the grain set aside for next year's planting, sacrificing any hope of future recovery for a few more days of life. Then you turn to the unthinkable. You strip the bark from trees, grind it into a bitter paste, and bake it into a desperate, inedible loaf. You dig for roots. You eat the family's scrawny chicken, then the cat, then the rats. You see your neighbors leaving, becoming refugees on the roads, begging until they weaken and die in ditches. And then, the stories begin to circulate. The ones whispered in horror, of the things people did, of hunger bread, the famine bread made of things no bread should ever be made of. Historians still argue whether these periods of mass starvation were inevitable Malthusian checks on population or the direct result of a callous and extractive feudal system that prioritized the wealth of the few over the survival of the many. But the ergot is a special kind of hell, known as St. Anthony's fire. This fungus contains powerful alkaloids that are closely related to LSD. When consumed in bread made from infected rye, it causes convulsions, hallucinations, gangrene, and a terrifying burning sensation in the limbs, which often turn black and rot away. Entire villages could be struck by what appeared to be a collective demonic possession or a divine plague. People would see visions, writhe in agony, and die in unspeakable ways. In an age without science, the cause was a complete mystery. Was it God's wrath, witchcraft, poison in the water? No one thought to look at the dark purple spurs on the rye they had harvested and ground into flour. The episodes were sporadic, unpredictable, and utterly terrifying. The only treatment was a pilgrimage to a monastery dedicated to St. Anthony, whose monks were known for caring for the victims and, perhaps not coincidentally, often had access to stores of uninfected grain. The quirky fringe and deeply dark tidbit is that some scholars have retroactively diagnosed outbreaks of ergotism as the cause behind certain historical events, such as the accusations that sparked the Salem witch trials, or even the visionary experiences of some medieval mystics. It is a haunting thought that a loaf of bread could literally bend reality and tear a community apart. The social contract, so carefully enforced by the manorial system, shatters under the pressure of famine. The fear of the pillory is nothing compared to the fear of watching your children starve. The Lord's mill and oven stand idle, for who has grain to grind or bake? Instead, the woods become a new source of terrified activity, as people forage for anything remotely edible. The village priestess' assurances of God's plan ring hollow in the face of such senseless suffering. This is when the quiet resentment towards the Lord in his well-fed castle curdles into something darker. This is when the rumors of a hidden granary, of wagons of grain being moved under cover of night to be sold for even greater profit in a neighboring town, can spark violence. The bread riot is born from this absolute desperation. It is not a calculated political act. It is the raw, animal instinct of a community cornered by hunger. A mob armed with scythes and clubs in a righteous fury might descend on the manor or the monastery not to murder, but to seize the grain they feel is their rightful due for the labor they have invested in the land. It is the system breaking down completely. The foundational truth revealed that all of this, the lordship, the law, the church, is built on your ability to eat, and when that ability vanishes, so does their authority. The field that was once a symbol of life now stands as a monument to failure, a silent, accusing witness to the fragility of your entire world. In the shadow of famine's desperation, the simple loaf takes on a power that transcends the merely nutritional. It becomes an instrument of judgment, a conduit for the divine, and a key to unseen worlds. You've seen how bread can kill through poison or absence. Now you will see how it was believed to discern truth from lies. In the cold, solemn space of a judicial proceeding, a priest might hold aloft a piece of bread, often the sacramental host itself, and administer the course or the ordeal of the morsel. An accused person, brought before this makeshift court, would be forced to swallow a dry piece of bread or cheese of a specific size, often while a liturgy was chanted, imploring God to choke the guilty and spare the innocent. you would stand there, your throat already constricting with fear, as you were commanded to swallow. If you choked, if you coughed, if you struggled to get it down, it was a sign of your guilt, a judgment from God himself. Your faith then rested not on evidence or witness, but on the dryness of your mouth and the terror in your heart. It was a crude, psychological weapon, a trial by anxiety where the bread was both the test and the potential executioner. This practice of judicial ordeals was a mainstream part of early medieval law, a way to resolve disputes and accusations in a world without forensic science or modern legal bureaucracy. It was based on the unshakable belief that God would intervene directly to reveal the truth. The bread, as a sacred substance, was the perfect medium for this divine intervention. While more brutal ordeals like trial by fire or water were also common, the ordeal of the morsel was particularly insidious because of its apparent simplicity. There was no visible burn or drowning to judge. It all came down to a subjective interpretation of a person's physical reaction under extreme duress. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were ever truly believed in by the authorities who administered them, or if they were simply a form of psychological theater, a way to leverage a suspect's fear of divine retribution to elicit a confession, or even a method for a community to reach a consensus and resolve a tense situation through a ritually agreed-upon outcome. But bread's power wasn't confined to the courtroom. In the dim, smoke-filled interior of your hut, away from the eyes of the priest and the Lord, bread held a different, older kind of magic. This was the realm of folklore and cunning women, of charms and superstitions that existed alongside, and sometimes in opposition to, the church's teachings. A crust of bread, carried in your pocket, could be a charm against witchcraft or evil spirits. It was believed that bread, as the ultimate symbol of life and sustenance, had an inherent purity that could ward off darkness. A loaf baked on Christmas Eve was said to never grow mold and to possess potent healing properties. A piece of it might be grated into a poultice for a wound or fed to a sick animal. There were specific rituals for baking, buttering the sign of the cross on the heel of the loaf, before putting it in the oven to ensure a good rise, or whispering a secret prayer into the dough. The quirky, fringe tidbit involves dream bread. It was said that if you placed a piece of bread under your pillow on a specific Saint's day, you would dream of your future spouse. This humble food was a passport to the subconscious, a tool for divination in a world where the future was a terrifying, unknown country. This belief in bread's magical properties created a strange duality. On one hand, it was the body of Christ, the heart of the most solemn Christian rite. On the other, it was a pagan-friendly talisman, a thing of earth and home and folk magic. This duality reflects the medieval mind itself, a complex layers of official doctrine and deeply ingrained local belief. The bread on your table was never just food. It was a potential lie detector in a trial, a protective amulet in your pocket, a healing agent in your medicine, and a window into your dreams. Its significance was so profound that to waste it, to treat it with disrespect, was considered a sin inviting misfortune. Even the crumbs were carefully swept up and given to the birds or animals, for to tread them underfoot was to invite poverty and hunger. So as you break your loaf at the end of this long day, you do so with a respect that is more than just gratitude for the calories. You are handling an object imbued with the power of law, the mystery of faith, and the whispers of ancient magic. It is a heavy weight for something so small, a world of meaning in every crumb. The world of your dark, earthy maslin and the Lord's fine white manchet is vast enough, but it is not the entirety of the bread universe. There exists a realm above even the Lord's table, a gustatory stratosphere so rarefied you can scarcely imagine it. To catch a whiff of it you must follow the crumb trail of unimaginable wealth, away from the smoky village and the bustling town, to the ports where strange ships dock and into the hushed spice-scented air of a royal or papal kitchen. Here, bread is no longer mere sustenance or even a symbol of status. It is an edible canvas for displaying obscene wealth and global reach. The flour is still the finest, bolted white wheat, but it is now merely the base, the blank page upon which a story of extravagance is written. Into the dough goes a fortune, sugar, a precious import more expensive than gold, eggs by the dozen, fresh butter and cream, and the most coveted treasures of all exotic spices. This is the bread of kings, popes, and merchant princes. It is a product of the spice trade, that vast network of routes connecting the markets of Europe to the Moluccas, India, and the Far East. A single loaf could contain pepper from Malabar, cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves from the distant Spice Islands, and saffron, the most expensive of all, derived from the delicate stigmas of crocus flowers, each thread painstakingly harvested by hand. The cost of the spices in one of these loaves could feed your entire village for a month. This bread is not baked for hunger, it is baked for awe. It is served at feasts not as a staple, but as a delicacy, a course in itself, often shaped into intricate forms like castles, animals, or coats of arms, gilded with edible gold leaf. To eat it is to consume geography and commerce, to taste the proof that its owner possesses the means to command the fruits of the entire known world. The mainstream historical fact is the transformative effect the spice trade had on the cuisine of the elite. It created a distinct culinary language of power, where the heat of pepper, the perfume of cinnamon, and the golden hue of saffron were immediate indicators of a diner's immense wealth and sophistication. These spices were not just for taste, they were for show. They signaled participation in an international network of luxury that stood in stark, deliberate contrast to the bland, monotonous diet of the common man. Historians still argue whether the primary driver of the medieval spice craze was genuine flavor, preference, a desire to show off wealth, or the widespread belief in spices' medicinal and preservative properties. Were they used to cover the taste of slightly old meat, or were they truly cherished for their own unique flavors? The debate rages on, a testament to the complex motivations behind historical taste. But beyond the known spices lay even more exotic, fringe additions, the stuff of rumor and legend. Some recipes for the ultra-luxurious pain ragoon or rich bread called for ingredients that sound more like alchemy than cookery. Powdered pearls or gemstones might be added, not for flavor, but for the belief that their essence could be transferred to the eater, promoting health and longevity. Ambergris, a waxy substance produced in the intestines of sperm whales and found floating at sea or washed up on beaches, was a highly prized rarity. It has a unique, marine, musky scent that acts as a fixative for other flavors, and it was worth its weight in gold. The idea of eating bread that contained something coughed up by a mythical sea monster from the edge of the world was the ultimate flex. There were even treatises that discussed the properties of bread baked with powdered unicorn horn, which was almost certainly narwhal tusk or bezoar stones, concretion found in the guts of animals, believed to be universal antidotes to poison. To eat such a loaf was to partake in a form of edible magic, a feast of symbols as much as of flavors. This world is so far removed from your own that it might as well be on the moon. The scent that wafts from your pottage is of onions and smoke. The scent that wafts from a royal kitchen is of 100 different lands, a olfactory map of empire and exploration. Your bread is a tool for survival, a plate, a testament to your labor. Their bread is a luxury good, a symbol of a power that does not toil, a world where sustenance is an afterthought to spectacle. The grain connects you. The same sun that baked your field also grew the wheat for their manchet. But that is where the connection ends. After it is reaped, your grain and theirs enter to different universes. Yours is taxed, ground, and baked into a necessary staple. Theirs is sifted, blended with the treasures of the Orient, and transformed into an edible jewel. It is a potent reminder that the same substance can be the bedrock of life for one man, and a frivolous indulgence for another, a dichotomy as old as civilization itself. Let's return from the spice-laden air of the elite and step back into the dusty, anxious world of the common baker. You're not a guild master in a prosperous town, but a simple village baker, perhaps even the one bound to the manorial oven. The assize of bread hangs over your head like a sword. Its official weights and measures a constant source of low-grade terror. You've just pulled a batch of loaves from the oven. Their crust's a perfect golden brown. They look good, they smell good, but the real test is yet to come. You know the ale conner could arrive at any moment, his official brass weights in hand, to perform a random inspection. Your profit margins are vanishingly thin. The Lord takes his cut. The cost of grain fluctuates wildly, and firewood for the oven is expensive. The temptation to shave a little weight from each loaf, to make your grain stretch just a bit further, is a constant, whispering devil on your shoulder. But the cost of getting caught is the pillory, public humiliation, and a fine that could ruin you. So, you develop a different strategy, one born of pure, calculated self-preservation. You begin to count your loaves for the market. You count them not once, but twice, your fingers moving quickly. 12 loaves, a dozen. But then, your hand moves almost automatically to grab one more from the cooling rack. You add a 13th loaf to the batch. This is not an act of generosity. It is a form of insurance, a baked-in buffer against the brutal mathematics of the law. This extra loaf is your hedge against the myriad variables that could make your batch slightly underweight. The flour might have been a bit more damp that day, causing the loaves to be denser. The heat of the oven might have been slightly uneven, leaving one end of a loaf less baked and therefore heavier with moisture. Perhaps your own measuring wasn't perfect. The 13th loaf is your safety net. If the Ailconner scales show that your dozen loaves are even a fraction under the required weight for the current price of grain, you can quickly offer this extra one. A baker's dozen, sir, you'll say, with a nervous smile. 13 for the price of 12. It's our custom. This practice, born entirely from the fear of punishment, becomes so widespread that it evolves into a custom, a expected norm. The mainstream historical fact is that the baker's dozen is a direct result of the assize of bread and its draconian penalties. It was a pragmatic workaround created by bakers to ensure compliance and avoid the devastating consequences of even an accidental shortfall. This extra loaf even had its own name. It was called the inbread or the vantage loaf. It was the baker's share, but not in the way the miller or the lord took their share. This was a share given back, a voluntary offering to the customer to preemptively placate the authorities. In some places, it was specifically the size of this 13th loaf that was scrutinized. It had to be of full weight itself to count as a legitimate buffer. Historians still argue whether this practice was a clever and necessary adaptation to an overly rigid system or a subtle admission that the entire economic structure was so precarious that those at the very bottom had to effectively work a portion for free just to stay out of trouble. Was it a triumph of ingenuity or a symptom of systemic oppression? But the story of the baker's charity doesn't end with this calculated dozen. There was another type of extra bread, one mandated by law and custom. This was the wastel bread or pain perdu, the lost bread. This wasn't the fine white wastel bread of the aristocracy, but something simpler. It referred to the stale, leftover, or slightly burnt loaves that could no longer be sold at full price. The law often required bakers to set this bread aside, to be sold at a significantly reduced cost to the poor or to be given as alms. In some cities, bakers were obligated to donate a certain number of these loaves to the local hospital or monastery for distribution. This created a small, informal welfare system at the bakery door, where those in direst need could hope for a piece of day-old bread to soak in their pottage. The quirky, fringe detail is the linguistic legacy of this. The French term pain perdu, meaning lost bread, is what we now call French toast. The lost or stale bread wasn't thrown away, it was found again by being soaked in milk, an egg and fried, transforming it into a new, delicious dish. It's a perfect metaphor for medieval frugality. Nothing, not even failure, was ever truly wasted. So the next time you hear the phrase a baker's dozen, remember its origins. It doesn't come from a place of generosity or a lucky extra. It springs from the cold fear of the pillory, the clink of the Ailconner's weights, and the desperate calculations of a craftsman operating on the knife's edge of survival. It is a fossil of economic anxiety, preserved in our language. That 13th loaf is a ghost of medieval law, a silent testament to a time when the price of bread was a matter of state security, and the weight of a loaf could determine a man's honor and his future. It's a small, curious echo of a world where every transaction, even something as simple as buying bread, was underpinned by a complex web of regulation, risk, and the constant, grinding pressure to just get by. For centuries, the resentment has simmered. It's in the weight of the miller's tax, in the heat of the Lord's exclusive oven, in the gritty texture of the adulterated loaf, and in the hollow ache of a famine year. The price of bread is the barometer of your world, and when the mercury plummets, when the grain fails and the cost of a loaf climbs to heights that mock your labor, that simmering resentment boils over. It ceases to be a personal grudge and becomes a collective roar. The bread riot is not a random outburst of violence. It is a political statement, the only form of protest available to those who have no voice, no vote, and no power. It is the moment when the mob realizes its strength lies in its numbers and its desperation. You find yourself swept up in it, not as an individual, but as part of a single, hungry organism. The target is never random. You surge towards the mill, where you suspect grain is being hoarded. You gather at the baker's shop, demanding he sell his loaves at the just price of tradition, not the extortionate price of the market. You might even march on the manor itself. This is the mainstream historical reality. Bread was the spark that could ignite revolutions. The phrase "they couldn't afford their bread" is the simplest and most accurate explanation for the fall of governments throughout history. In the 14th century, the situation becomes even more volatile. The Black Death sweeps through Europe, wiping out perhaps a third of the population. For you, the peasant who survived, this creates a bizarre and unprecedented opportunity. With so many dead, there is a desperate shortage of labor. Suddenly, Your work has value. You can demand higher wages for your labor in the fields. You might even dare to leave your village for a town offering better pay. The old feudal order, built on your immobility and your obligation to serve your lord, begins to crack. The lords, seeing their wealth and control diminish, tried to fight back. They passed laws, like the Statute of Laborers in England, attempting to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and force you back into your traditional, poorly paid role. It is a catastrophic miscalculation. The attempt to control both the price of bread and the price of your labor creates a pressure cooker of frustration. The peasants' revolt of 1381 is, at its heart, a revolt about economic justice, and bread is its banner. The quirky, fringe element of this upheaval is what might be called the flour war. In times of shortage, rumor was a weapon as powerful as any club. A story would spread through the starving crowds like wildfire. A wealthy merchant had a secret warehouse full of grain. The lord was sending wagons of flour to be sold elsewhere for a higher price. The baker was hiding his best loaves for his wealthy customers. Whether these stories were true or not was almost irrelevant. They provided a focus for the inchoate rage. The mob, acting on this rumor, would become a spontaneous investigative committee, bursting into barns and storehouses. Finding even a small cache of grain was proof enough to justify the riot in their minds. There's a darkly comedic aspect to it, the sheer, frantic energy of 100 starving people tearing apart a merchant estable in search of a non-existent hoard of flour. But the comedy ends abruptly when the militia arrives. The authorities saw these riots not as protests, but as a fundamental threat to the social order, to be put down with brutal efficiency. Leaders were hanged, drawn, and quartered. Participants were fined into oblivion. It was a deadly gamble. Historians still argue whether these bread riots were truly the first sparks of class consciousness and organized political revolution, or whether they were merely spontaneous, desperate explosions of hunger with no larger ideological goal. Beyond filling empty bellies for one more day, were the peasants of 1381 fighting for a new world order, or were they just trying to force a return to the old, traditional just price that they felt was their right? The debate is crucial because it asks if they were reactionaries or revolutionaries. You, in the midst of the chaos, probably aren't thinking in such grand terms. You are thinking of the hunger in your children's eyes. You are thinking of the injustice of the miller's heavy thumb. You are thinking that the Lord, eating his spiced manchet in his hall, has forgotten that you are the one who grew the wheat. Your anger is simple, direct, and fueled by the most basic of human needs. The loaf of bread, that simple, everyday object, becomes a symbol of all that is wrong, all that is unfair. And when you raise that loaf, not to eat it, but as a standard to rally round, you are holding up the very foundation of society and demanding that it be rebuilt. The seeds are being sown. The unassuming history of medieval bread is about to spill out of the bakery and onto the streets, and it will change the world. And so, the journey of the humble loaf, from a stalk of rice swaying in a medieval field to a symbol of revolution in the streets, finds its way, eventually, to you. That simple, profound act of breaking bread connects you across a chasm of 1,000 years to every peasant, every baker, every lord, and every rebel who came before. The unassuming history of medieval bread does not end with the collapse of the feudal system. It merely evolves, its legacy baked into the very fabric of our modern world. The frantic, dangerous energy of the bread riot gradually channeled itself into more structured forms of protest, and eventually into the political systems that would govern the price and availability of food. For centuries to come, the fear of hunger, so visceral and ever-present in the medieval mind, became a central concern of the modern state. The size of bread is gone, but its spirit lives on in agricultural subsidies, food safety regulations, and welfare programs, all designed to prevent the kind of desperate unrest that a loaf of bread could once unleash. The mainstream historical fact is the industrialization of baking. The miller's monopoly and the baker's guild were eventually swept away not by revolution, but by technology. The invention of the steam-powered mill and later the roller mill in the 19th century made the process of refining white flour incredibly cheap and efficient. For the first time in history, the white bread that was once the exclusive domain of the elite became affordable for the masses. The modern sandwich loaf, its crusts perfectly even, its crumb pillowy soft and unnaturally white, is the direct, industrialized descendant of the Lord's simnel bread. We achieved a kind of egalitarianism of texture, if not always of nutrition. Historians still argue whether this shift to highly processed white bread represented a genuine improvement in living standards or a catastrophic decline in dietary health. Trading the gritty, nutrient-rich fiber of masculine for empty calories and blood sugar spikes. The quirky, fringe tidbit in our modern era is the surprising, full-circle return to the medieval way. The recent explosion of interest in artisanal sourdough baking, in home milling, and in heritage grains is a conscious rejection of that industrial model. When you carefully maintain a sourdough starter on your kitchen counter, you are participating in the same symbiotic relationship with wild yeasts that the medieval alewife and baker understood instinctively. When you seek out dense, dark rye loaves or bread made from spelt and einkorn, you are, in a way, choosing the peasant's maslen over the lord's manchet, but now as a luxury, a choice for flavor and health. The crumb of a sourdough loaf is scrutinized online with the same fervor that a medieval peasant might have inspected a loaf for signs of fraud. We have, in many ways, romanticized the very hardship they endured, seeking to recapture authenticity we feel we've lost. It's a fascinating paradox. The bread of necessity has become the bread of desire, and as you lie here now, perhaps your own stomach full from a meal that likely included some form of bread, that thread of connection is complete. The fear is gone, the desperation faded into history books, but the essence remains. The warmth, the comfort, the simple, profound satisfaction of a piece of fresh bread that is a constant. It is a taste that would have been as familiar to a tired medieval peasant as it is to you. A primal comfort that transcends centuries. The unassuming history of medieval bread is, ultimately, a human history. It's a story of survival and innovation, of oppression and resistance, of faith and magic, all contained within a crust of baked dough. It reminds us that the most ordinary things in our daily lives are often the ones with the deepest and most extraordinary stories to tell. So let that sense of connection settle over you now, a gentle weight like a warm blanket. Let the images drift away: the vast fields, the groaning mill, the fiery oven, the bustling market square. They have served their purpose, these ghosts of bakers and peasants. Their stories now woven into the quiet of your own room. The anxieties of that distant world are not yours to hold onto tonight. The taxes are paid, the harvest is in, the loaf is baked and eaten. There is only the soft, rhythmic sound of your own breathing, the gentle hum of the fan, the distant, muffled sounds of the world at rest. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the bed, supported and safe, a world away from the hard benches and dirt floors of the past. The journey is complete. The narrative of grain and flour, of fire and hunger, has unfolded and now gently closes, its final chapter written in the peace of this moment. There is no more need to listen, no more need to think. Let the knowledge that you are fed, you are safe, and you are resting be the only thought that remains. Allow the darkness behind your eyelids to become soft and deep, a field of nothingness where not even a single stalk of rye grows. Drift on that stillness, carried away from history and into the quiet, welcoming arms of sleep. Let every worry, every thought, every memory of the day soften and blur at the edges, dissolving into the profound and gentle silence of the night. You are here, you are now, and that is enough. Just breathe and let go.